February 13th, 2021. Texas went dark. 37 million people. No heat, no water, hospitals on generators. The worst infrastructure failure in American history. While Texas collapsed, something else happened. Nobody reported it. The lights stayed on across the northeastern United States. The heat kept running in Minnesota. The grid held in Michigan. Canadian hydroelectric power kept flowing south, quietly, without interruption, without a single headline. 3 years later, Canada made a decision. It spent $34 billion building a pipeline to the Pacific coast, not toward America, away from it. For the first time in history, Canada had another customer, one that paid more, one that asked less. Washington noticed, but by then, the decision had already been made. This is the story of how the most important economic relationship in North American history quietly changed sides, and why most Americans still have no idea it happened. It starts with something most Americans take for granted: water. The water dependency begins at the border and runs straight into the kitchen tap. The Great Lakes, Superior, Michigan, Huron, Erie, Ontario, hold roughly 21% of the world's surface fresh water. They supply drinking water to approximately 40 million people across the United States and Canada. What most Americans do not fully register is that the international boundary runs through the center of this system. The St. Lawrence Seaway, which carries iron ore from Minnesota to Pennsylvania's steel mills and moves grain to Atlantic ports, flows through Quebec, the Detroit River, the Niagara River, the St. Mary's River, each one a working artery of American industry, each one a shared or Canadian-controlled waterway. Canadian hydroelectric generation, primarily from Quebec's river systems, powers homes and businesses across New York, New England, and parts of the Midwest. For the average American household in the Northeast, the electricity arriving on a winter morning has a reasonable probability of originating in Canada. The 5,500-mile border between the two countries is the longest in the world. It is also, as a practical matter, impossible to secure as a resource perimeter. Water does not pause at customs declarations, but water is only the first layer of dependency. What moves through pipelines underground runs even deeper into the American economy. The United States imports more oil from Canada than from any other country on Earth, approximately 4 million barrels per day, accounting for more than half of total American crude imports. That oil travels south through pipelines that cross the border at specific fixed points. Infrastructure that took decades to build and cannot be replaced in any politically relevant time frame. The Enbridge pipeline network, moving Alberta crude through the northern United States to refineries in Illinois, Oklahoma, and Texas, carries roughly 3 million barrels per day on its own. Industry analysts have estimated that a prolonged disruption to this corridor would double gasoline prices at American pumps within weeks. For a retired household on a fixed income, that is not an abstraction. It is the cost of filling a tank to drive to a medical appointment. Canada also supplies approximately 20% of the electrical power consumed in the northeastern United States. Quebec's hydroelectric dams and British Columbia's river systems generate power at a scale that no domestic alternative could replicate quickly. In 2024, Canada completed the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion, redirecting Alberta oil capacity toward the Pacific coast. For the first time, Canada has a serious commercial alternative to the American market for its energy exports. Washington has not yet found a second supplier. And beneath the oil and the water lies a third layer of leverage. One that will determine who builds the technology of the next 50 years. The Arctic is the defining strategic geography of the 21st century, and Canada sits directly between the United States and most of it. The Northwest Passage, the shipping route connecting the Atlantic and Pacific through the Canadian Arctic archipelago, runs entirely through waters Canada claims as internal. As climate change reduces ice coverage, this route is becoming commercially viable for the first time in recorded history, cutting approximately 7,000 nautical miles off the alternative passage through the Panama Canal. Every major maritime power is recalibrating its strategy around this corridor. Canada controls it. Beneath the surface, the calculus is equally consequential. The Canadian Shield, the ancient rock formation that covers more than half of Canada's landmass, one of the oldest and most mineral-rich geological structures on Earth, holds among the world's largest deposits of lithium, cobalt, nickel, and rare earth elements. These are the materials required to manufacture electric vehicle batteries, solar panels, wind turbines, and the guidance systems inside American defense hardware. The United States Department of Defense has formally identified these minerals as critical to national security. In 2025, Canada accelerated export agreements with the European Union and Asian economies, directing a growing portion of critical mineral output toward non-American buyers. Simultaneously, Ottawa announced an accelerated NORAD modernization investment, asserting Arctic sovereignty more aggressively than at any point since the Cold War. Washington's structural problem is not that it failed to recognize Canada's leverage. It is that there is no short-term response available. In March 2025, the Trump administration imposed 25% tariffs on Canadian goods. Canada responded within days, targeted counter-tariffs on more than $20 billion of American exports, calibrated to affect politically sensitive districts. The message was deliberate. The following month, Mark Carney won the Canadian federal election on an explicit mandate to reduce economic dependence on the United States and diversify toward European and Asian markets. For the first time in the modern history of the relationship, Canada was not managing the partnership. It was restructuring it. The asymmetry here is structural. Canada's geographic advantages, the water, the pipelines, the Arctic position, the mineral deposits, do not change with elections. American administrations cycle every 4 years. Canada, quite simply, can wait. And every cycle that passes without a structural American response deepens the dependency it inherits. Washington has not been idle, but the response reveals as much about the limits of the situation as about the strategy behind it. The trade relationship between the United States and Canada exceeds $800 billion annually, the largest bilateral commercial relationship in the world. American policymakers understand the cost of genuine rupture. The political pressure campaigns, the tariff threats, the public statements about Canadian dependency, none of it addresses the underlying infrastructure reality. Replacing Canadian oil imports requires alternative pipeline infrastructure that does not exist. Replacing Canadian hydroelectric supply requires domestic generation capacity that takes 10 to 15 years to permit and construct. Replacing Canadian critical mineral supply chains requires mines, processing facilities, and long-term contracts that the United States is only beginning to develop. The paradox embedded in Washington's position: every action that pressures Canada, tariffs, diplomatic confrontation, sustained economic friction, accelerates Canadian diversification away from the American market. The pressure designed to maintain the relationship is, in practice, funding its transformation. Canada is not choosing adversaries, it is acquiring options, which raises the question of what the board actually looks like today, and where it goes from here. By every available structural measure, Canada's geographic position in the global order is more consequential today than at any point since the post-war era. Not because Canada changed. Its water, its oil, its Arctic coastline, its mineral deposits have always been there. What changed is the world around it. The energy transition made critical minerals essential. Climate change made Arctic routes navigable. Geopolitical fragmentation made a resource sovereignty a primary instrument of national power. Canada happened to hold all three, not by strategy, but by geology. The bilateral relationship is not ending. The trade flows, the shared defense commitments, the integrated supply chains. These are too deep to unwind in any near-term horizon. What is changing is the assumption that governed the relationship for 70 years, that Canada needed America more than America needed Canada. That assumption no longer holds, and both governments know it. What remains genuinely uncertain is how far Ottawa will take its new posture. The Carney government has a mandate for diversification, but diversification has costs. Disrupted contracts, slower capital flows, diplomatic friction with the most consequential bilateral partner Canada has ever had. Whether Canada formalizes a new strategic doctrine or returns, over time, to the traditional model depends on decisions not yet made in a political environment still forming. The variables are real. The timeline is open. What is not open is the underlying geography. The Great Lakes do not move. The pipelines run where they have always run. The map was always the argument. Canada simply started reading it aloud